Welcome to this week's feature interview. I'm Kelsey Hubbard. Today I have with me Dr. Rife, who just recently wrote a new book. Dr. Rife, thank you for joining me on set.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So what exactly is your book about?
The book is called Born of Conviction, and the cover image shows a photo taken on the campus of the University of Mississippi on, I believe it was September 26, 1962. James Meredith was trying to become the first African American student to enroll at Ole Miss, University of Mississippi. And the photo on the left is the state's Lieutenant Governor, Paul B. Johnson, who happened to be a Methodist, interestingly enough. And that's Meredith on the right. He's the one African American in the photo. In the middle is James McShane, who was the Chief Marshal of the United States, and behind him is John Doerr, who was an attorney for the Department of Justice. And so the marshal and the attorney were trying to get Meredith registered as a student at Ole Miss. The courts had said repeatedly to Ole Miss, you have to do this, you can't stall anymore. But here's the lieutenant governor saying, no, you can't register. When Meredith finally did register, or did come to the campus, there was a riot on Sunday night, September 30th. Probably about 2,500 people there. 2 people were killed, all kinds of property damage, all kinds of injuries. But the next morning, James Meredith registered as the first African American student at Ole Miss. Most white citizens in the state of Mississippi were totally against this, blamed the federal government, said it was totally illegal, which was absurd. The court said you have to do it. And this included, of course, churches. So there were 4 young white Methodist ministers in Mississippi. The Methodist Church then was segregated by race. There was a separate organization for the black Methodists in Mississippi who were upset that the bishop and other leaders in their conference didn't say anything in response to this. And they wanted to say publicly that not all white Methodists in Mississippi are rabid segregationists and white supremacists who want to keep James Meredith out of the University of Mississippi at all costs, etc. So they got together about the middle of October, wrote a statement that they wanted to have published in the conference newspaper, and they got eventually there were 28 signers, all of them white Methodist ministers in South Mississippi. And the statement was published in the conference newspaper on January 2nd, 1963. Basically what it said, it really wasn't that radical looking back on it now. Basically what it said was we should have freedom of the pulpit. Ministers should be free to say what they believe God is calling them to say in church. It quoted some language from the Methodist discipline which said that the teachings of Jesus prohibit any discrimination on the basis of race. It expressed support for the public schools and basically implied that when inevitable desegregation does come, we don't want the state to close the public schools, which is what was done in Arkansas and Virginia in the late 50s to prevent integration. And then they finally said, we're not communists, which is kind of absurd, but back then anybody who said anything out of the ordinary was called a communist. So they published this statement in early 1963, and it caused a huge controversy. 3 of the ministers that signed it were kicked out of their churches immediately. And so the book is an attempt to tell that story.
And you being from Mississippi yourself, did that, I guess, influence you to write this novel?
Definitely. You might say that those of us who grew up in Mississippi have Mississippi in our blood. Maybe we have it in our chromosomes. I wasn't even born there, but we moved there when I was 6 years old. My dad taught at Millsaps College, which is a Methodist school like Emory and Henry. And I also grew up Methodist, and I'm an ordained United Methodist minister now. So This was a story that I wanted to tell. It's a story of my parents' generation, but it's also my generation's story because I have talked to many folks my age who were kids. I was 8 when this statement came out. I wasn't aware of it, but I've talked to many folks of my generation who say, we just want to figure out what this all meant, what was going on. It was such a big controversy, and there was such difficulty related to response to the civil rights movement, etc.
So the Born of Conviction title, what significance does that exactly have?
The statement was called Born of Conviction, and one of the principal part of the wording of it said something like, born of conviction from the depths of our souls, we're called to say what we believe is right. And I think basically these ministers were saying, we know that what we're going to say is going to get us in trouble. We know that most whites in Mississippi aren't going to agree with us, but we believe this strongly that we're going to say it anyway. The subtitle is White Methodists in Mississippi's Closed Society, and that's an attempt basically to say, how did the White Methodist Church respond to the social upheaval caused by the civil rights movement in the early 1960s? That really, this period from 1962 to 1964 was kind of the peak of white resistance in Mississippi to civil rights change, and so I wanted to look at that.
Well, that's super exciting. Thank you for joining me on set today.
Good to be here.
This has been your feature interview, and if you would like to check out this book, you can go get it at the Merc. I'm Kelsey Hubbard.